By 1916, Air Force casualties of the war had risen drastically. The life expectancy of an RFC pilot over the front lines was 23 days. In what was to become known as Bloody April, 361 aircrew and over 3,000 aircrafts were lost. Appeals went out to the infantry, artillery and cavalry for new applicants for civilian pilots. Instructors were urged to volunteer. Despite being dubbed the Suicide Club by officers of the regular army, the appeals for more men were very successful. There was no shortage of gallant, courageous young men to volunteer, grasping the exciting prospects of becoming one of the new Knights of the Air. There was also many cases of men being previously wounded in battle and considered unfit for further duty, signing up to the RFC. The medical requirements seemed less stringent than in other army or navy. Some went on to become pilots, even though they had only one eye or leg, and there were those with serious chest complaints and disorders of the stomach. The training program in place at the time struggled to keep up with the massive rate of expansion. The lack of adequate training became so critical that an ex-RNAS pilot, Noel Pemberton Billing, pressed charges on the House of Commons of criminal negligence by the RFC commanders. He accused the leaders of the RFC of negligence for the horrendous number of accidents that occurred at training squadrons rather than in action, there being more fatalities in training than at the front. The lack of an organised training plan was proving to be very costly in both pilots and aircrafts. There were at least 24 crashes per day at each training airdrome, and on average, one student pilot died every day in Britain and many more were seriously injured. It was not until the introduction of the Smith-Barry-Gosport training scheme in the late 1917 that a basic course syllabus was established. The length of the course increased and a higher training curriculum was introduced, although these courses were still liable to be shortened and adapted, depending on how desperate was the need for pilots at the front. To improve the level of pilot training, the new system introduced additionally qualified criteria, namely that the pilot must have flown at least 15 hours solo, flown at least 15 minutes, 6,000 feet, and made 2 nighttime landings assisted by flares. The training schemes became increasingly specialised as it developed, with the establishment of higher training schools such as Turnberry. Pupils were to undertake training in landing, bomb dropping, aerial fighting and gunnery, night flying and formation flying. Before a pilot was posted on active service, it was anticipated that he would have to spend at least 30 hours in the air, flying the type of combat aircraft he would use over the front. Not only were there no official training programs prior to the Gosport system, there was no purpose-built schools to accommodate the pupils. Golf courses such as Turnberry and race courses such as Ayr and many others throughout Britain were requisitioned. These were ideal candidates, having a large expanse of relatively flat ground and plentiful nearby accommodation. Flying instructors were also desperately needed. These posts were filled by men who were no longer capable of active service at the front or on operational rest. Who better to pass on first-hand experience of actual combat conditions? This was not a method welcomed by exhausted frontline pilots who, having served the horrors of aerial combat and living on the front line, were predictably averse to being killed by a clumsy student. Flying instructors were known to nickname the student pilots the Hun because it was reckoned they destroyed more aircrafts than the enemy. Captain Harry Butler gave an account to the Pioneer newspaper in March 1918 of the training procedures in place at Hythe and Turnberry. After the student of aviation has done his theory course, providing he is successful, he is sent to a training squadron to be taught to fly. This course extends over a period of 3 months. The pupil is taken up into the air with the instructor in a machine, which has dual control. The first few flights, the pupil does nothing but watch the controlling movement of the instructor and admire the beauties of the world below. After a few flights, the pupil is allowed to put his hands on the controls and feel the movements of the instructor. A few hours of this, and he is allowed to take charge of one set of controls and is allowed to fly the machine, and any faulty movements done by the pupil are checked by the instructor. The pupil is now allowed to do steep bank turns without side-slipping the machine, how to glide and how to land a machine, and how to take a machine off the ground. When a pupil has done a few hours of this and considered safe, he is sent up to do his first solo. This is to fly an aeroplane by himself, without anyone else in the machine. This is the most exciting time of his aviation tuition. It very often happens that upon the pupil landing the machine after his first flight, it is more or less smashed to matchwood, and unfortunately very often with fatal results to the pupil. The next stage for the successful pilot is to practice landings and flying in general, followed by a turn in a faster type of machine, one which has a little more vice and not quite so tame. After he has done about 30 to 40 hours of solo flying, he is sent to a finishing school and goes through a course of special flying, shooting and fighting in the air, the aerial tactics. The course lasts a month and is taught at this school here in Turnberry. The first thing he is taught is looping the loop. An instructor takes him up in a machine and loops the loop with him several times, allowing the pupil at the same time to have his hands on the controls and feel what movement takes place. After the pupil has looped a few times under the tuition of the instructor, he is next taught how to spin, roll and turn a machine. Also formation flying, shooting with an aerial, machine gun and bomb dropping. If the pupil is successful in passing the examination in all the courses mentioned, he is graduated to given his wings to wear and is gazetted as flight lieutenant, and in most cases he very soon finds himself well on active service over the lines in France.